49,000. That's how many Chinese EVs Canada just approved for import at a 6.1% tariff, while Americans pay over 100%. BYD already registered its factories with Transport Canada. First vehicles could arrive within months, but here's what nobody's discussing. 5 car brands selling in Canada right now face extinction-level competition. One just posted a $24 billion loss. Another has executives publicly stating they have 12 months to survive. A third took $19.5 billion in charges trying to compete with China. Today I'm revealing which brands face the most pressure and why number 1 is the silent killer nobody sees coming. Ford. You didn't expect America's truck king on this list, neither did Wall Street, but the numbers tell a brutal story that Ford's marketing department doesn't want you to hear. Ford's Model E division lost $4.8 billion in 2025. That follows $5.1 billion in losses during 2024. Year after year, the EV bleeding continues with no end in sight. Then in December 2025, Ford announced $19.5 billion in charges related to its electric vehicle strategy reset. That single announcement sent shockwaves through the industry. The casualties are piling up fast. Ford permanently halted production of the F-150 Lightning electric pickup. The next generation T3 electric truck project? Canceled. The next generation all-electric van program? Canceled. Ford shifted toward gas and hybrid commercial vans instead. The battery plant in Glendale, Kentucky that was supposed to revolutionize American battery manufacturing? All 1,600 employees laid off. The entire facility is being converted to make batteries for data centers instead of vehicles. Now here's where Canada gets ugly. Ford's Oakville assembly plant was supposed to become Canada's flagship EV manufacturing hub. A major investment announced to build 3-row electric SUVs. That plan was completely scrapped. The facility pivoted to conventional truck production instead. Canadian workers who were promised an electric future are now building gas-powered vehicles while watching Chinese EVs prepare to cross the border. The Mustang Mach-E, assembled in Mexico, represents Ford's best electric hope in Canada, but it faces a brutal pricing reality. In markets where BYD already competes, like Australia and Europe, the price gap between Chinese EVs and competitors typically runs $10,000 to $15,000 in BYD's favor. When those same vehicles arrive in Canada through the new quota system, Canadian buyers will face similar math. For 2026, Ford projects another $4 to $4.5 billion loss in its EV division. That's not a typo. They're planning for billions more in losses. Meanwhile, Ford Pro, the commercial truck division, generated $6.8 billion in operating profit in 2025 with double-digit margins. The trucks print money. The EVs burn it. Ford isn't going bankrupt anytime soon, but their EV ambitions are in full retreat. CEO Jim Farley has admitted that Chinese competition has humbled him. He's seen what BYD builds and how little they charge for it. He knows Ford can't compete on cost, so they're pivoting to hybrids and trucks where Chinese brands aren't yet dominant. Here's the problem. Those Chinese brands are coming to Canada now. The refuge Ford was counting on is about to get crowded. Every affordable EV buyer who would have stretched for a Mach-E will soon have Chinese options at significantly lower prices. Ford's Canadian dealers are watching this unfold in real time. They've seen what happened in Australia, where BYD went from zero to top-selling EV brand in just 2 years. They've watched European markets where Chinese vehicles now capture significant market share. They know what's coming. The only question is how fast market share erodes once Chinese vehicles hit showroom floors. The irony cuts deep. Ford built its reputation on making vehicles affordable for ordinary Americans. The Model T democratized the automobile. Now a Chinese company is doing the same thing with electric vehicles while Ford loses billions trying to compete. The student has become the master. But Ford's problems look almost manageable compared to the German giant up next, Volkswagen. The company that sells more cars than almost anyone else on the planet is trapped between two disasters. In China, they're getting crushed by BYD and domestic brands. In North America, their EV strategy is stumbling. Now those same Chinese competitors are following them to Canada. Volkswagen entered 2026 facing unprecedented challenges on every front. The ID.4, their flagship electric SUV for North America, faced a stop sale order in 2024 due to a door handle defect that could cause doors to open unexpectedly while driving. Over 20,000 vehicles were recalled in Canada alone. By the time the fix arrived and sales resumed, momentum was damaged. The ID Buzz, their retro electric van that was supposed to capture hearts and minds, is skipping the 2026 model year entirely in North America. They're taking a gap year to figure things out while competitors keep selling. The ID.3 hatchback that sells well in Europe never offered in Canada. Let me put the scale of the challenge in perspective. It took Volkswagen Group 13 years to sell 4 million EVs globally across all their brands combined. BYD sold 2.26 million battery electric vehicles in 2025 alone. In a single year, BYD matched more than half of what VW accomplished in over a decade. Company is losing ground where it matters most. China sales continue declining as domestic brands capture market share. Volkswagen's CARIAD software division has been a well-documented disaster, causing delays on vehicles, and we're forcing partnerships with Rivian and even XPeng, a Chinese competitor, just to catch up on technology. When you're partnering with the companies beating you just to stay relevant, you've already lost the initiative. VW still sells well in Canada overall. Their sales grew about 7.5% in 2025. But here's the problem. That growth came largely from their traditional gas and hybrid vehicles, not EVs. Their electric strategy is struggling while Chinese manufacturers perfect theirs. The pricing math is brutal. In markets where BYD competes directly with Volkswagen EVs, the price gap consistently favors BYD by thousands of dollars. Same segment, similar range, significant price difference that no amount of German engineering prestige can justify to budget-conscious families trying to make their first EV purchase. Meanwhile, Volkswagen is scrambling to catch up with affordable electric models in Europe, launching vehicles with prices under $27,000. But those vehicles aren't coming to North America. This market gets left out while the competition intensifies. The executives in Wolfsburg know they're in trouble. They've partnered with Rivian on software because their own attempts failed. They've partnered with XPeng because they need help with EV technology. They're learning from the companies that are beating them, but learning takes time, and Canadian consumers aren't waiting forever. When BYD dealerships eventually open in Vancouver and Montreal offering vehicles at prices Volkswagen literally cannot match profitably, market share becomes vulnerable. Once lost, it's almost impossible to reclaim. Consider what happened in China, Volkswagen's second largest market for decades. Chinese brands grew their market share from under 40% to over 60% in just 5 years. Volkswagen went from dominant to desperate. The same playbook is now coming to Canada. The difference is that Canada is supposed to be safe territory. North America was supposed to be protected by tariffs and regulations. Now that protection is eroding, and Volkswagen's response has been to skip model years and cancel products while their competitors accelerate expansion. Now here's what makes the next company's situation genuinely terrifying. Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep, Stellantis. I'm counting these as one entry because they share the same parent company, and that parent company just posted what might be the worst financial results in modern automotive history. Stellantis reported a net loss of 22.3 billion euros for 2025. That's roughly $24 billion. The year before, they were profitable. Now they've lost more in a single year than most car companies earn in a decade. The company took 25.4 billion euros in unusual charges, roughly $27 billion, as it dramatically reset its strategy. CEO Antonio Filosa admitted in the earnings statement that they overestimated how quickly the market would pivot to electric vehicles. The company is now shifting back toward what they call freedom of choice across electric, hybrid, and internal combustion technologies. Let me translate that corporate speak. They bet heavily on EVs that demand couldn't support. Now they're scrambling to bring back V8 engines and combustion vehicles they had already started phasing out. In Canada, Stellantis sales fell 12% in 2025 to just 114,720 vehicles. The Windsor assembly plant faced temporary shutdowns. Canadian and Mexican plants halted production due to tariff uncertainty. Production cuts rippled through their entire supply chain. Let's break down the damage brand by brand. Chrysler is down to 2 vehicles in Canada, the Pacifica minivan and the Grand Caravan. That's the entire lineup. The brand that invented the minivan, that gave us the 300, that represented American automotive innovation for generations, now survives on family van sales alone. Chrysler sales actually grew strongly in late 2025, driven almost entirely by those Canadian assembled minivans. But one product category can't sustain a brand forever. Dodge killed the Challenger and tried the Charger muscle cars to transition to electric. The Charger, Daytona EV debuted to weak demand. Legacy Charger and Challenger sales collapsed as inventory dried up during the transition. Now Dodge is rushing to bring back gas-powered Chargers with the 6-pack twin-turbo 6-cylinder, but those arrive late 2026. They abandon their core customers for an electric future that never materialized the way they expected. Jeep faces ugly realities. Consumer Reports rates the Grand Cherokee below average for reliability compared to competitors. The brand that once dominated the SUV segment is now fighting for relevance against competitors with better quality scores and fresher products. Here's the Chinese threat these brands can't answer. BYD's technology is advancing at a pace that embarrasses traditional manufacturers. Their Yangwang division builds luxury SUVs with capabilities that seem like science fiction. When Chinese vehicles eventually arrive in Canada through the quota system, even in limited numbers initially, they'll demonstrate how far behind American brands have fallen in certain technologies. Stellantis suspended its dividend to preserve cash. They issued billions in emergency bonds. The company expects significant tariff expenses in 2026. When Chinese EVs arrive offering comparable capability at 30 to 40% lower prices, these brands have no clear competitive response. Chrysler might survive on minivan loyalty because parents need practical vehicles and the Pacifica remains genuinely excellent at what it does. Dodge and Jeep face sustained pressure from competitors building compelling products for less money. The worst part is that Stellantis saw this coming and still couldn't avoid it. They invested billions in electric vehicles. They restructured their entire product lineup. They made the bets that analysts said they needed to make. And it still wasn't enough. The Chinese competitors were just too fast, too efficient, and too well-funded. Now Stellantis is trying to reverse course while simultaneously cutting costs, laying off workers, and reassuring investors that everything will be fine. It's a difficult balance. Too much cost-cutting damages product quality. Too little damages profitability. Either way, Chinese competitors benefit. But at least Stellantis has a turnaround plan and a leadership team actively working on solutions. The next brand might not survive long enough to execute any plan at all. Nissan. This isn't speculation or analysis. This is what Nissan's own executives are saying publicly. The Financial Times reported in November 2024 that two senior officials close to Nissan stated the company has 12 to 14 months to survive without finding a major investor. That quote sent shockwaves through the automotive industry. That clock has been ticking ever since. The company announced 9,000 layoffs, roughly 7% of its global workforce. Production capacity was slashed by 20% as plants went idle. Renault, the French automaker that rescued Nissan from near bankruptcy back in 1999 with a bailout that became the stuff of business school legend, has been steadily selling off its ownership stake. They've dropped from 43% toward the mid-30s and intend to reduce further. In other words, the company that saved Nissan is walking away just as things get desperate again. Here's the twist that makes this story complicated. Nissan Canada actually grew sales over 6% in 2025. The Canadian operation is performing, but that local bright spot can't save a company bleeding out globally. Corporate headquarters in Japan is fighting for survival while the Canadian division watches helplessly from across the Pacific. The Honda merger talks that dominated automotive headlines through late 2024 and early 2025 ultimately collapsed in February 2025. The deal was supposed to create a Japanese automotive superpower capable of competing with Toyota and Chinese manufacturers. Instead, it fell apart under pressure, leaving Nissan without a rescue partner. Nissan is now seeking what executives call an anchor investor, possibly a bank or insurance company, to stabilize operations and provide the cash needed to survive. But finding someone willing to invest billions in a struggling automaker facing an onslaught of Chinese competition isn't exactly easy. Here's the devastating context that makes Nissan's situation almost tragic. They were supposed to be an EV leader. The Nissan Leaf launched back in 2010. They had a 15-year head start on electrification. They saw the future before almost anyone else in the industry. D sells more EVs in a single month than Nissan sells all year. The Leaf is being phased out because demand collapsed. The Ariya electric SUV was supposed to represent Nissan's comeback. It starts at about $39,000 in Canada. That's competitive pricing for an electric SUV. But when Chinese alternatives arrive through the quota system at potentially $25,000 to $30,000 for comparable vehicles, that gap becomes a serious problem. Nissan's survival depends on finding an investor willing to bet billions on a turnaround, successfully executing that turnaround under immense financial pressure, and somehow competing against the most aggressive automotive expansion in history, all simultaneously. The math is brutal. Nissan needs billions in investment just to stabilize operations. They need billions more to develop competitive EVs. They need years to bring those vehicles to market. And throughout that entire process, Chinese competitors will be selling vehicles in Canada, building brand awareness, and capturing the customers Nissan desperately needs. Time is the enemy. Every month that passes without a rescue partner is a month closer to the deadline that Nissan's own executives set. Every quarter of losses drains the cash reserves needed to fund a turnaround. Every new BYD model that launches in global markets is another reminder of how far behind Nissan has fallen. Senior executives gave themselves 12 to 14 months back in November 2024. The clock is running out. Which brings us to the brand nobody is even talking about, Mitsubishi. This is the collapse hiding in plain sight, the extinction event happening while everyone watches the bigger names struggle. Mitsubishi Motors is 34% owned by Nissan. That ownership stake was supposed to be an asset. Instead, it's become an anchor dragging both companies toward the bottom together. The connection runs deeper than ownership percentages. Nissan, Honda, and Mitsubishi formed a strategic alliance to jointly develop electric vehicles, software platforms, and next-generation technology. It was supposed to be Japan's answer to Chinese and American competitors. When Honda walked away from the Nissan merger talks, that alliance fractured. Mitsubishi is now tied to a struggling partner with no clear path forward. In Canada, Mitsubishi is already marginal. Market share hovers in the low single digits. Annual sales barely register against competitors selling 10 or 20 times as many vehicles. The lineup consists of aging vehicles competing in precisely the segments where Chinese manufacturers excel: small SUVs, affordable crossovers, practical family vehicles. The Outlander PHEV was genuinely innovative when it launched. A plug-in hybrid SUV at an accessible price point. It found buyers who wanted electrification without range anxiety, but that advantage has evaporated. Chinese manufacturers now offer plug-in hybrids with more electric range, more features, better technology, and lower prices in every market where they compete directly. Here's what makes Mitsubishi's situation uniquely dangerous. They don't have the financial resources to pivot or adapt quickly. They don't have a separate profitable division like Ford's trucks or Stellantis' Ram pickup line. They don't have a wealthy parent company with deep pockets willing to absorb years of losses. They have Nissan, which is fighting for its own survival with executives publicly warning they might not last another year. When analysts and journalists discuss which major automaker might face the most pressure, Mitsubishi rarely comes up because people forget they exist. That invisibility is exactly the problem. A brand nobody notices is a brand nobody will fight to save. The 49,000 Chinese EVs entering Canada won't directly sink Mitsubishi, but they'll accelerate the pressure already building. Every customer who buys a BYD instead of an Outlander is a sale Mitsubishi needed. Every point of market share lost to Chinese competition is a point Mitsubishi cannot afford to lose. If Nissan dramatically restructures or collapses, Mitsubishi faces severe consequences. The ownership stake that was supposed to provide stability becomes a liability. The alliance partnerships evaporate. The supply chains built around shared platforms unravel. Mitsubishi's Canadian future looks increasingly uncertain over the next few years, not because of one dramatic event, but because of slow erosion from every direction at once. 5 brands, billions in losses, and 49,000 Chinese vehicles arriving to accelerate the pressure. Ford retreats from EVs entirely. Volkswagen can't compete on price. Stellantis hemorrhages cash while resetting strategy. Nissan fights desperately for survival. Mitsubishi fades quietly toward irrelevance. This is happening right now. Which brand do you think faces the most pressure? Drop your prediction in the comments.